Amen.
There are moments in history and moments in our time, and we've all experienced them in our lives, that both call us to faith and challenge our faith. And those are moments, some of them, we're called those the moments where there's a theodicy, which is basically a moment when you ask God why, how, and what should we do? And a lot of those personal moments are the moments when we're at the deathbed of someone who we think are far too young to have died. Or they're in the place where that we have watched things happen to people in life and we wonder why. And those are the moments that call upon our faith to answer, but they also call our faith into question. And sometimes these moments are larger. They are the moments also in our society. There are moments that are not just moments of personal reflection. There are moments of basically societal reflection. Those same times when people remember, oh, there's a church. Don't you remember all those moments when no one cares about faith and work and whatever? Let's bad happens and everybody comes, where is God? And you want to say, well, you weren't worried about God last week. How come God becomes so important now? And so this idea of the moment, the big moment, the moment that calls us both to faith and challenge our faith is the one that we meet in Psalms 137. And the moment is described that we sat now by the rivers of Babylon. We now come to a point, and those that are described because there are moments, these are moments when we never thought we'd be there. Moments when things are unimaginable. Moments when we can no longer think about the journey we make. We're just putting one foot in front of another. Have you ever been there where you can't imagine what the long-term journey are? You're just putting one foot in front of the other. All of your knowledge, all of the things that we thought we know, all of the world that we thought were together, suddenly has been called into place. And so it was with these folks in Psalms 137. For they thought of themselves as a special people, as God's favorite people, as an invincible nation, and they had been taken into captivity. They had been taken to a place that they thought they'd never been. And just like this morning, I don't know about you, but if anybody here ever thought that we'd be where we are now, they're not telling the truth. Okay, let's face it. Everything that we're dealing with right now is nothing that things are invincible. 140,000 people have died and counting of COVID-19. We've had shelter in place audience and restaurants are falling on and jobs are lost and they may never come back again. Schools are trying to figure out whether they should open or not open. And then on top of it all, there was George Floyd, that 8 minutes of pain that reminded us of 400 years of pain that people have been denying every day, and it finally became something we could not deny and calling us again. And then this last week, and even in the midst of all this time, like the children of Israel, we find ourselves in a place even that we knew we could possibly go in, but we don't know what to do with these feelings. But Joseph Lowery has died, who was formerly the president of SCLC. When King was alive, he's died and we could not have his funeral. C.T. Vivian, who Martin Luther King called the best preacher he's ever heard, died just yesterday. And John Lewis, the conscience of this nation, the guy that every congressman that had 40 years beyond the civil rights movement, that is on our screens every day and called the conscience of is dead, and we cannot mourn him. These are the times of big questions, of amazing things that we never conceived of. And it's even more kind of crazy. We've all lived our lives believing science was important, but apparently now it's a political thing. Science being called into question, economics, social history. Now we understand. I have read this passage my whole life, and I thought as an African American, I understood what it means to be by the river of Babylon, but actually I don't think so. Because the rivers of Babylon means this kind of moment, when we literally don't know which way to go and what to do, and people can look at us and say, What is God saying?
Okay.
And there he went, when he remembers Zion. For the wicked carry us away captivity, spoil from us a song. How can we sing King Alpha's song in a strange land? So let the words of our mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God.
Okay, Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars, we hung our harps. For there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you. If I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction, happy is he who repays you for what you have done to us. He who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks.
Around the country, I'm called to preach and to teach upon issues of race or economics. We have in the Justice and Peace Foundation, I'm the CEO right now. We have a program right now where I'm dealing with 15 African-American churches that have multiple deaths because of COVID from our country. I'm dealing with a bunch of young leaders who are under 30, who are marching in the streets, who are talking about police brutality, listening to this old man, and I am in their eyes ancient. I now understand what it means to be by the river of Babylon. And when there's by the river of Babylon, people look and say, what are you gonna do now? Look at the text. He said, by the river, in that space, they came to me and said, sing. Aren't you supposed to have the answer? Sing. It's one of the songs of Zion. And I always thought this was one of the meanest moments in Scripture. When someone is hurting, when someone has clearly difficult time, sing. But then I realized now in this 130, this moment also, that we have a response of people who are mean and non-empathetic that are also calling us to sing. Oh, you know those folks, don't you? Those are folks who says, just keep singing. Oh, just act like nothing's wrong. Keep singing. Forget about don't march. Pretend that there's no problem of race in the country. In fact, in your church, begin to say that God has handled it all, and this nation is indeed just a nation that God has called into being, and it'll all work out. Just sing. Just sing. Avoid white supremacy. Avoid the system that's here that's working for some people and not working for the other. Don't protest. Keep the Confederate flags. Let's just sing. Just keep singing. Keep calling and keep just going into the national narrative of everything will be all right. Just sing. Act like there's no pandemic. Say that in fact, if you're faithful, you cannot wear a mask and everything will be all right. Just keep singing. Sing and avoid the questions of inequality. Just keep singing. And some churches have just kept singing. They've just decided that because they believe in God, because they are a Christian, or because faith, that faith means, yes, sing. You avoid it. And what a cruel response that is. What a cruel question that is. Because what it does is denies the pain of others. It denies the reality of history, and it denies that faith is not something that looks away from pain, but looks into pain. But you'll also see that there are folks who tell us the second question of the narrative is the question they ask, how shall we sing? Now, it's really interesting. There are some people that just want us to sing, but then there are other people, that the people themselves, the people that I hope are in this room, that said, no, the question is not that we should sing. It's not that we shouldn't have faith. The question is, how does our faith speak to this moment? How does our faith call us to step into something? How does our faith remove and call us to be something bigger than this moment? And this is why the deaths of those men that I talked to are so devastating, because they all answered that question, and they all call us to answer this question tonight. But there was a Martin Luther King's pastor on campus, was a guy by the name of Howard Thurman. And if you haven't heard about him, you really should hear about him. And one of the things that he talked to Martin King is to, in the midst of the worst part of your life, in the midst of things that are going really bad, don't look into the pain, but look into the growing edge. And King then later translate that to say that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, so that we should keep on persevering. So faith calls us to perseverance. What we speak into this moment is not to look away from things, but to say, how is it that we should look into things that make us happy, that makes us move forward? And there's another thing that when we say, how should we sing? Not to deny. One of the things I hate about just sing, because it denies us the reality that we ought to think. I know it's not too popular right now, but you also, if you're going to have faith, you ought to think with your faith. Faith is not an assertion of simply parroting something. It is a thought process also. It is analysis also. Oh, wait a minute. I don't know if there's any conservative Christians who will say, yeah, but that we're not called to do that. We're just called to look at the Bible, see things happen, and see what's going on. Have we not read Ephesians 6? In the book of Ephesians, when Paul in his day was looking, he said he had an analysis that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? The analysis is, but against all kinds of institution. And it comes down to say, we wrestle against evil. And it does not mean that evil is something that is overtaking us. It means that evil is choices that have been created, that we've all created to create a system. But the good news is our choices create a system, then our choices can also deconstruct the system. So the thing that we have to understand about faith is also about thinking and looking, analysis, and to move forward and to tear down some things as well as build things up. And the last thing that we have to look at about singing is, how shall we sing? And this one, by the way, I get in trouble with the really young people who love what I just talked about, system analysis, but they get mad at the second thought. But it is what Jesus says. Jesus says in John 15 that you also have to understand that faithful people believe that relationships matter. And I don't mean just relationship on the level of macro, but it matters who you're in relationship with. It matters how we come together, how we treat one another. It matters whether we're only staying in our own tribe and only with people who look like us and only people that we're comfortable with, because Jesus himself says that what God does in Jesus Christ, think about this, radically does it. One of the reasons I'm a Christian, one of the things that blows my mind continually is that God comes and walks among us and becomes our friend and not just our God. And we who are faithful must understand that our relationship matters. We must understand that not just thinking about theories, but also connecting with one another. Let's go back to that psalm anymore. And even in those psalms, and I know that some of you looked and said, why do you read the whole psalms? You could just stop with by the rivers of Babylon. But if you'll notice what the psalmist says, but on that day, remember what the Edomites did. Remember what the Babylonians did. And remember how we dealt with that. And he calls them to anger. I know this is a very uncomfortable part of the scripture. But the reality is, when you've been harmed and when you've been hurt, one of the analysis is, what do we do with our anger? And by the way, if you ain't excuse me, let me say that in the better English than if you ain't angry. But if you're not angry and you look at race in America, you don't understand race in America. If you're not angry and you look at what's happening around, you don't understand. We're going to have to deal with our anger. But we need to give people permission to be angry so that we will not be afraid of anger. The issue is what to do with anger, but it is not important. It is very important that we say to people that anger is in fact a part of being this reality, because it says in the scriptures, and I've never noticed this from here on out, when I'm about to preach is something only after I've been through the pandemic that I get. Because I never noticed what it says. It says that our response has instruments and not just voice. It says we hung our harps. We hung our harps on the poplar tree and we didn't sing. So faith has both instruments and proclamation. Some of the times that I think we get involved with, some of the things that we forget, is that we have ways that we can change our society. We have ways that we, as Christians, I will dare say we have an opinion about how things should go. I know that it's popular right now to say that we only have a spirituality, but Christian faith has a spirituality, and it also has a recommendation about the world, the way it's to go. That governments are not something that is away from our faith. That the way our government acts has something to do with how we act. John Lewis said this: when you see something that's wrong, do something about it. I know it's a radical concept, isn't it? That is more than just praying about it. It's actually doing something about it. It actually is marching. It's actually voting. Those are Christian value. And Martin King did it this way. That nonviolence, the way that, because I just talked about the violence, the way that I'm going to handle my need to do something is, guess what? Do something. Because if you don't do something nonviolently, you're going to do something violently. I want to start right there and want you to think about that. Because when I deal with these under 30-year-olds who literally have gone to the streets, and I hear people try to tell them to just be quiet or get off the street or stop, I'm thinking, what else do you want them to do? How else do you want them to deal with the idea that I can't even drive in America without being able to be stopped? How else do you want them to deal with my friend and my loved one and my family member and my child living in a world like this? And by the way, that coalition is multicultural. It's not just Black, it's brown, it's white, it's male, it's female, all saying, what do I do? Well, understand that faith calls us to do something. Second thing that is an instrument that we have to play again is the instrument of the denial of fear. You see, one of the reasons we've done nothing is we've been afraid that we don't know what the solution will be. And that's the privilege of those who are benefiting from the system. It's okay to continue to say, one day we'll do it, if the day you're not getting killed by it. It's okay to say, sing us a Lord's song, and one day go ahead and do it. But when you literally understand that I am already by the river of Babylon, I'm already being oppressed, and I'm already being hurt by this. And let me stop here and give just one caveat. Because oftentimes when I preach about this, everyone thinks I'm just talking about Black people, but understand something. Racism is as dangerous to white people as Black people. It is as dangerous and disconcerting to the soul of the America, no matter where you stand around it. It is an evil and a pain. It's like when we talk about anti-Semitism, and we have some projects in Europe, and some people say, well, there's not that many Jews there. But if you have anti-Semitism, you understand it is an evil that erodes everything else in your society. So the reality is we've got to do something. And so the problem isn't the fear of doing something. We need to recover again the courage. Remember what Paul told his young protege in 2 Timothy 2:17? God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. Now, I could preach on that, but I told you I'm not being Baptist, so I'm not going to go into that, other than to say this, that when you overcome fear and you step into courage, you find power. Because fear is always something that keeps us from moving forward and diminishes who we are. When you are afraid, you are living under what we can be. And the last kind of thing that we have as an instrument that we sometimes don't value as much as we should is that we as a faith ought to give the world optimism. But optimism, the idea that somehow that God is in control. See, when you and I believe that there's a God that cares about the world, that's involved with the world, then even in the midst of our worst circumstances, we can say, but God. We can, because everyone here, I would say, has a testimony. Well, we thought it was the worst. We couldn't do better. It was the end. And then something happened and we realized, but God moved. I like what, again, Howard Thurman said. There's an essay I want you to look up when you want to, called Life, not an essay, it's a poem. And I'm going to read a little bit of called Life Goes On. And he says, there is no need to fear evil. There is every need to understand what it does, how it operates in the world, what it draws upon to sustain itself. We must not shrink from the knowledge of the evilness of evil. Over and over, we must know that the real target of evil is not the destruction of the body, the reduction to rubble of cities. The real target of evil is the corrupt spirit of humanity, and to give our souls the contagion of interdisintegration. When this happens, there is nothing left. The very citadel of humanity is captured and laid waste. Therefore, evil in the world around us must not be allowed to move from without to within. No matter how bad the day is, no matter how deep the night is, you keep singing, because in the midst of that song is a witness that God is, a witness that God still cares, a witness that the fighting is not in vain. Why is it? And I could talk about you. The reason I love this crowd, because y'all know what the civil rights movement is. Some of the 30-year-olds clearly don't, but y'all know what the civil rights movement is. Why do you think they sung all the time? Sing in jail, sing when they were marching, sing when everything seemed to be destruction and they're gone. They sang not because they were happy, but because there's something deeper than happiness. It's called joy. That in the midst of all of this, it's joy. Now, again, I told you that one of the things I'd never seen until COVID-19 was when I looked at Psalms 137. It says, we hung our harps on the poplar tree. For those of you who know Billie Holiday, at the end of her song, every concert she ever sang, she always sung one song called Strange Fruit. And in that song, it says about the reality of strange fruit on the poplar tree. And that was before 1965 she sang. So in other words, she was singing that song to say, though there's strange fruit, Though we're by the river of Babylon, though we don't see what tomorrow holds, keep on believing that fruit will not always be on the tree. I had never understood the power of the poplar tree. And then I realized what she was saying is our answer is still among us. Well, I'm a Christian. And so I look and say, yeah, on a tree is an answer. It was on a cross. And on that cross, and the one who hung on that tree because of the injustice of his time, because of the meanness and the anger of a people, because of the impossibility even unto death and even unto the grave, there was still hope because there was a resurrection. Don't ever start understanding the power of faith and optimism, the power of this moment. As we work in policing, as I work with the young people, as I work with churches who are dealing with death and dying, we still remember that on an old rugged cross, hanging on that tree, is still a power to change. We still understand that we have to work in policy, we have to work in relationships, and we have to work in belief, because that's the work that needs to be done. I will end with one story that's kind of funny, tragic, and broke my heart. In our young people, we have a police person who came to talk to them, a 35-year vet who's been very, very, very successful at changing the relationships of policing and community. But he said, I used to be a Black Panther. And he began to talk about Huey Newton and all of those things. And I looked in one of these Zoom meetings and I saw people on the 30 looking like, who he talking about? And I had to stop him and said, you realize none of them know who you're talking about. And he looked at me with astonishment because he thought everybody knew. But I said, no, the burden of telling the story, the burden of reminding people of the power of faith falls onto every generation and every moment in that generation. So I would say to us, keep telling the story. Keep working in the context of all of these things. And keep knowing that even by the rivers of Babylon, we can keep singing and keep knowing that God is moving. It may not be like we thought. It may not be as quickly as we thought. But I remind you that the moral arc of the universe does bend towards justice because it's a stacked reality. Because it's not just us bending the arc, it's God's hand on us bending the arc. In the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Giver of life, amen.